Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Yeah, I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Similar to Dan, I went to UW Milwaukee. What I'm doing right now is actually kind of resetting my career trajectory. I've spent pretty much almost 2 decades, not to age myself, building brands, working at big structured retailers, going from meetings to prep for the pre-meeting to D2C startup life, where literally gigantic decisions were made over Google Chat. I've also led agency campaigns when I was working at a large agency for some household names. Really, my favorite part of my career really is the most recent, which was scaling a private equity-backed subscription brand as its first CMO. Basically, I've lived through every decision between what deck and how many pages should it be, all the way, and the red tape with all of that, all the way to like, we need to grow yesterday.
Awesome. So I'm curious in terms of like your background, like what made you kind of want to get into marketing and retail like in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I've always loved tech. Like I was playing around with, again, not to age myself, but like computer and technology back when MySpace was a thing and like was learning how to essentially code websites and whatnot back then through and learning CSS through that. But I mean, I guess being the first year of the millennial generation, we have lived through an entire digital revolution or evolution, I guess, but from AOL to MySpace to Facebook to Instagram stories and Reels, TikTok, and now the rise of AI. I feel like we've had this really unique time in history, really, to build brands through all of that. But the interesting thing is I've worked with very old traditional retail and department store specialty who was trying to be cutting edge to a true D2C digitally native brand. And I think that what I've learned is it's kind of, I was really good at math, so this is my analogy for it. It's like once you know the equation, you can pretty much apply the basic marketing principles to anything. The tools are changing. Of course, the landscape changes, the consumer changes, but some of those tried and true principles are literally what I think has been the biggest success for myself and then the biggest, most successful brands.
So in terms of trends and changing, obviously things have changed a lot compared to when you first started, especially now. Like I think things are shifting more online. How has retail shifted, I guess, even besides that from when you first got started compared to now here in 2025?
I think it's like fashion is kind of like what's in now will eventually come back into style. I think that brand has been so important along the way, but I think different brands focus on it with different priority. We're kind of at this pivotal moment now where brand is everything. There's so much like in these ultra crowded markets, pick your market and it's pretty crowded. So I think coming back to brand and that storytelling and making sure that you have something that your audience really believes in and is motivated by and you're different than everyone else. So that differentiation is survival. I also think that just staying up on technology is absolutely key. Like brands that aren't trying to figure out ways to be efficient. I mean, besides differentiation, cost savings and cost management is key to survival. So learning how to use AI for efficiency and to help your lean teams and resources go farther, I think that's key. And then the advertising space and the way you reach your consumer, those tools are ever changing. So I think really just making sure you're staying on top of it and not leaning too much into the outside. I do think at times companies look to agencies as the silver bullet, but I think first you have to look internal, build really strong teams and talent and believe in what you're doing, and then, look to fill the bench strength of what you don't have when you need to.
So in 2025, do you think that there is a place for physical retail? And if so, like what does that look like? Because I think that, more and more people are shopping online. I know that like many department stores are not as packed as they once were. So what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think, well, for sure. I absolutely, to be short and quick about it, I absolutely do. And I think it's almost more important now than ever. I think that just being a brand online, selling what basically could be just a commodity to most people, whether it's this white shirt or what have you, there's a brand story that should be behind it. And the physical environment, no matter what you create digitally, is the best way to do that. You'll see brands that did start digitally native, like Warby Parker's and things like that, open physical stores. And the reason for that is for that physical in-person experience, that human experience that you can't get digitally. And I do believe that the younger generations, the Gen Zs, what is the next one, Alpha or whatever, they're craving that. My daughter shops online less than I do, and she's 17. That's just starting to give you a little bit of a taste of, I think it's really less about, you have to be where they are at the moment. So of course you have to be online. You have to have all those things in place. But I think also just making sure you have a brand that people can experience in some way is important. I'm not saying that brands that are digitally native won't be successful or won't continue to be, but I don't think that the physical space is going away by any stretch.
But do you think the play is to like open up your own store for your brand, or to get your product in a bigger store where they're selling like multiple products, like a Macy's, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in that. If you're starting a product in a category that isn't tried and true yet, you still need to figure out that product market fit. That is so much harder than coming up with. I was just actually admiring the founder of Liquid Death through this masterclass I was listening to. And if you can find a category that might be crowded, but you have a cutting edge way to be different and then get found through a retail space, I think that just really accelerates your ability to create awareness and for customers to start to recognize your name. And then you can go off and do whatever you want from there. But yeah, I do think that's a really important key ingredient.
So yeah, I mean, I think maybe that there could be a difference between, like a CPG product versus apparel, in terms of like how people find it, they can discover it. Because I guess it's like, I speak for Liquid Death, people see like on the shelves of like a 7-Eleven, as opposed to like a T-shirt that might be like behind dozens of other T-shirts at like a Macy's or Kohl's or things like that. So I guess, yeah, from that perspective, should you like have like a certain level of scale on DTC first for, here in 2025?
I think for sure those are table stakes. So what's interesting, whether it's department store or even subscription services that introduce products like Stitch Fix or Wantable, they're basically introducing brands to consumers, just like a Nordstrom would or a Macy's would. Now, what's different now, though, is when I was back at Bonton in the department store space, most of the vendors we had did not have their own website. So it changes the dynamic between the merchant and the retailer, because now they can give you less margin, because if they don't sell it at Nordstrom, they're going to sell it on their own D2C site and make more money. So I think that is how that environment is shifting. So I do think that if you're going to be a brand and you're starting a brand new T-shirt brand or what have you, being online honestly is table stakes and it's required.
For sure. And I guess like in terms of being online, like what are some of the strategies that you're seeing now to really get exposure? Is it TikTok? Is it still Meta, Google? From that standpoint, like how do you really scale a brand nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and this is one of those cyclical things, it was kind of like when Facebook ads years ago, maybe 5 years, not even, or 10 years ago, probably less than 10, but the creative wasn't as big of a part of how ads were delivered. There was so much audience testing and so forth, but then the algorithm came along. So then that shifted the dynamic so that now creative is really what drives delivery and what drives relevancy to an audience. And so now we're back to this phase right now where that brand story that we were talking about earlier really matters. The creative needs to cut through. Again, it's so crowded. I think that is number one, having a great story to tell, which is your differentiator and why your brand should mean something to somebody. But then secondly, having creative to back that up and make sure that story is clear and concise. But then third, I mean, that whole digital experience of what follows, whether you're driving them to awareness about physical locations or you're driving them to the website, that is really key. You can't do that without, it's kind of like all the infrastructure has to be in place to run a restaurant. You have to have a service staff. You've got to have your cooks in the kitchen and the bus staff, et cetera, the hostess staff. You have to have a number of things kind of in place in order for that to work, whether that's your website, again, the digital experience that follows, the creative in place, the targeting, and obviously the right campaign structures too within the ad platforms. So I wish it was more simple, because it would make CMO jobs and marketers jobs so much more easy, but it isn't. So now you're having to become a master at so many more.
So I guess like for creative, are you seeing more like I think that there's always like this conversation like influencers or micro influencers or just, content creators. I mean, what kind of creative and content are you seeing resonate nowadays that actually converts and into sales?
I will start with some creators are really great at creating content and you work with those creators accordingly. You also have some creators that are really good at conversions, and sometimes their content does not match your brand and it's not something that you would use. So I think just taking a quick step back around influencers and creators and brand ambassadors or affiliate partners, you first have to kind of put them in those buckets and then determine what are your brand's needs. Some brands really just want the creative to then run in their own ad account so they have more control. Others want things to go viral, like going back to Liquid Death. Like the virality of some of their content is actually what made them who they are. So I think you have to define like your objective for it. I have tried micro and macro, and again, I kind of came back to that same principle. It really depends on what you're going for. I think that social proof, the validation, building some street creds, influencers, creators, they have a ton of help. Like they provide a ton of help in that space, especially if you're a brand new brand and you're working on that full funnel strategy and just trying to get awareness. So, depending on the stage of the brand and then what your objectives are, I think that there's a place for all of it. And it's another tool in the toolbox, and you have creative levers and conversion levers to pull.
How do you kind of measure that? Because I feel like also it can be challenging with some of these influencers or creators that are promoting so many different products. And it can be, I think, hard to like look at their audience from an audience perspective, see through that. It doesn't seem super like authentic. If they're promoting one t-shirt 1 week and a different t-shirt, 2 weeks later. So how do you kind of like mitigate that and make sure that this person is the right fit?
On the brand side or the consumer side?
I guess on both.
Yeah, I think consumers are smarter than brands give them credit for to start, or maybe even some creators. The really good creators, I think, at least from both sides, to be honest, know when a relationship has been built. Like they're consistently promoting Abercrombie and Fitch. Every time there's a new monthly product launch or seasonal product launch, they're with it and they're promoting it. I think that helps build trust. Like this isn't just, okay, this one campaign and influencers on for this brand, and then the next time they're working with American Eagle, the next time they're working with whoever. I think consumers see that, and I think on the brand side you see that too, because when you're in those negotiations with creators, you'll see by what they're asking. Are they asking for just like these one-time really high rates for one piece of content, or are they looking for a longer relationship? I'd say that if they're looking for that like longer relationship, okay, how long are you going to be sending me product? Will I get monthly drops? How can I make sure that I'm continuing to support you on my content, and then obviously getting what I need in return? You'll see through that. I think it's no different than, I guess, on the brand side. When you're sifting through agencies, you can tell the agencies who are in it for the quick win versus the long haul.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I think it can be difficult sometimes to sift through those content creators. And I guess like in terms of celebrities, right? 'Cause I think it's also been an interesting conversation about whether celebrities actually do move the needle or not. And I know, obviously that we just saw with, I think it was Hailey Bieber that sold for like $1 billion. But I think it is different, right? If they're launching their own brand versus promoting a different brand. So I guess like, what is that balance kind of?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very complicated space for sure. It definitely depends on the product. I do think CPG does a little bit better for things like that than maybe an apparel brand would, only because they're definitely wearing many different types of labels and brands and different things for, let's say it's a musician for a concert versus streetwear and stuff like that. So I think it really depends. It's tough to make it work on the brand side. To your point, if they are a celebrity creating a brand, that's a very different story because that is their brand identity behind it. So I think they can be helpful in certain ways. I definitely know there's case studies where celebrities of work either drive awareness or what have you, or drive product trials and so forth. But I do think it's a tough thing to make work, and it really does depend on the industry that you're in. I mean, Jimmy Choo, I argue against myself, Jimmy Choo was one that became very famous just by mishap because Sarah Jessica Parker wore it in Sex and the City, and that like really put Jimmy Choo on the map among competitors. So there's always an exception to the rule, but generally it is really tough.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it where it's like I was listening to a podcast of a guy that launched like a hat company, and he had like a NBA player wear his hat, and he kept running that ad saying, "Hey, like this guy wore a hat," and he was like a really good player and they won the championship. So it's like people are like, okay, like I want to wear this hat too because like he's making it, look cool. So like sometimes that works, but I think to your point, it's more of like an authentic thing because like he just bought the hat randomly and it wasn't like, yeah. So it's like it seemed much more, and like it is much more genuine as opposed to somebody being paid to like go and promote this product.
I mean, look at it also depends on the celebrity. There's different tiers of celebrities and like what they're into and then how closely a product aligns with their brand. But I mean, there's YouTube celebrities now that are sponsoring products that go crazy, but it really, there's so many factors in it that it's like, what channel are they promoting it? How does it align with their brand and so forth? So that is a very complicated space, but I do think it can work. It's just not maybe the norm.
For sure. So if you could go back in time to before you got started in your career, what is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
Gosh, people have asked this question and sometimes I change my answer to it. So if I am in any article or anything and it conflicts, it's just because I'm a growing, evolving human being. I would say with kids on their way to going to college, I would say, I've always been like kind of a type A perfectionist planner. I think that, your career is a journey. I mean, mine in and of itself, yes, there's a common thread of retail and marketing components, but I think just treating it truly like a journey, and every experience, even a failure, is going to like lead you to a spot that is going to help you learn and grow. Not being afraid of failure and making sure that you're okay. If you need to take a step back, take a step back. And it's not, something that you should let hang over your head or people judge you on. And then I would say, as far as like my career more professionally in the marketing space, I think if anything, I think I would have tried doing something a little bit earlier on my own. I'm just starting to, I know I mentioned this to you in an email, but I'm just starting to shift away from working in a brand and going into my own fractional CMO consulting kind of thing. I think wanting to build something on my own is something that I would have known that was something I wanted to do earlier on. I think I wouldn't have made different choices because that's what led me here. Knowing that was a North Star earlier on, I might have like taken advantage of different situations or relationships differently.
For sure. And I guess like, in terms of this business, who are the types of clients, like for anybody watching this, who are you kind of looking for? Certain brands, revenue, other things that people should kind of be like, where they could be a good fit to work with you?
Yeah. I mean, in general, I'm not really building like a full agency. I'm actually trying to brand it as the unagency because I'm not an agency person. I haven't been on that side for quite a while. And when I was, it was like 2 years out of my entire career. I've been hands-on in the trenches, in the execution, rolling up my sleeves. And I know there's a lot of brands that can't afford that type of senior leadership. When I first started at that young subscription brand that I worked at, I mean, I had 3 people and their talent and experience level was very entry level. So I think if you want your brand to get some traction first, I mean, lean on fractional CMOs like myself, early stage, very startup to all the way up to a few hundred employees is kind of the sweet spot I'm going for so that I can help do what I've done before with success.
Awesome. So if somebody watching this wanted to work with you or wanted to reach out to you, do you mind sharing your website, social media, I guess, best ways to get?
Yeah, you can find me under Tiffany Cooley on LinkedIn. My company name is Brand and Growth Co. So brandgrowthco.co. I'm working on the website launch like right now, so it might not be live for another week or so. I'm not sure when you're planning to take this podcast live, but you can find me there. LinkedIn might be the best way through a DM or what have you, and we'll go from there. But I'm super excited to get it going. I'm open to B2B, B2C, retail, health and wellness are really kind of the spaces I want to be in, but I'm open to many conversations just to make the connections.
Well, Tiffany, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.